Hoping for something is not a plan. We still need dealers to start to pay attention to this. We're looking for common sense in Washington, D.C. The FTC has put no common sense into this rule. The dealers shouldn't have to pay to have access to their own information.
Hello, and welcome to the latest episode of the AUTOVATE podcast. My name is Cliff Banks. I am the host and co-founder of AUTOVATE. Today, our guest is Mike Stanton, the president of the National Automobile Dealers Association. He's joining us from his offices in Tysons Corner, Virginia. So, Mike, last time I saw you was last week in your office in Virginia, and the world was much different last week than it is this week, actually, with the Biden announcement and ostensibly a new candidate for the Democratic Party. It's looking like. Let's just jump in there on the political side of the industry. Obviously, having a new administration, whether Democrat or Republican this year, coming in is going to impact the auto industry. What are some perspectives that from the dealer side that you have? I mean, what are some of the concerns or questions that we should be asking going into next year?
Well, that's a great way to start, Cliff. I mean,
just fire
you think
away.
because I live in DC that I have any more insight than the average American? Yeah, what a crazy week, and what does that mean for our industry? We don't know yet.
Sure.
We are hoping for in Washington, D.C. is some common sense administration when it comes to our industry that's more focused on the consumer and getting to where we need to go from a climate perspective in a rational manner, in a way that makes sense, in a way that consumers are going to embrace. The NADA has long said that we're just moving too far, too fast. And what our government's doing is just way, way outpacing consumer demand. And we have the data now to prove it. So I hope that you always have to hope, but you have to fight as well. That with change will come some common sense and a better way to look at things, because clearly we are headed for a break, and that's not good for dealers. It's not good for consumers. It's not good for our car company partners, and ultimately, it's not good for this country.
What would you say is would be a better common sense approach than what we're seeing right now, or have seen over the last couple of years, in terms of, and I'm referencing specifically the whole EV question, because at some point, the government has to be involved at some level at encouraging development and innovation, but also the consumers. Much of that's going to depend on what the consumer says. But what in your mindset, or even in the the mindset of NADA, what would be a better common sense approach?
Well, it takes everyone, right? Consumers, dealers, the car companies, and government to get us where we want to go. But we got to move at the same pace. And right now, the government's aspirations are way ahead of the consumer. Well, and the dealer, we see it every day. We're talking to thousands of customers every single day. And, Cliff, we're doing our part, right? The inventory's there.
Right.
The investment's there in terms of facilities and service operations, but the demand's not quite there. The government can say something, the government can throw money at something, but actually getting those chargers, the infrastructure in place, has proven to take a lot longer than I think that any of us expected. And our car companies, that they're moving at the speed of business. They're producing great cars right now.
Right.
The EVs are good. They're very good. But the demand's not there yet. And so we've got to keep, as we've said, we've got to watch the data, watch demand, and then be nimble and be able to pivot. And that's what we're hearing from many of our manufacturers. Flexibility in terms of production. We're seeing it everywhere now, because, we can't turn our business in what is a 15, 16 million unit a year business into something that looks like half of that, because we're going to comply our way into half of that, which just means that consumers are going to hold onto their cars longer. It's going to be good for the used car business. And we as dealers, we can work through that. but it's not good for the environment and it's not healthy for our industry overall. So, hey, one of the toughest things people do is when you make a mistake, admit it, and then you bring up a new plan and you try to work a different plan. And we're hoping we get that with the new administration here in DC, because this is clearly not working the way they thought it would.
Right. And we're seeing a lot of that right now, adjustment from the manufacturer side now. And I think some of the pain that the dealers have felt in recent months or the last couple of years has been more manufacturer driven than even government driven. Would that be accurate?
Yeah, it's getting alignment with the manufacturers. They're all over the place.
Right,
I mean, some of them had a faster head start into the BEV space. Some of them were heavily invested in hybrid, and some of them playing catch up. So there's all these different strategies. There's different competitive aspects.
Right.
So trying to get our manufacturers all on the same page has proved to be just about impossible. And we hear very different things from, say, a Toyota versus a Ford when it comes to compliance. Cliff, how is Toyota going to just build what the customer wants, and Toyota is going to build and Ford is going to build what the government is complying them to build? Those are two very different messages that we're hearing from the car companies, and there are a bunch in the middle that are just trying to figure their way through this.
Right.
Ultimately, it's going to fix. We know it's going to fix. It has to. Our industry is too important to the overall economy, but it has been challenging to try and navigate these waters, to say the least. The good thing is the dealers, for the most part, we are we're united in how this needs to be approached. We're looking for direction. A dealer in South Dakota, very different than consumer demand in South Dakota, very different than a consumer demand in Los Angeles. There's just a lot of information that needs to be shared and thought through, and we need to do better from a strategy standpoint.
Right. Let's talk about the whole FTC regulations that are now in the courts. Where does that stand? It's I think coming up in October, and what are the issues from your perspective?
So you're referring to the FTC's proposed vehicle shopping rule,
yes,
which was put into place, and they quickly stayed their own rule. By stay, that just means they hit the pause button on their own rule pending litigation. The NADA joined forces with the TADA, the Texas Automobile Dealers Association, and we are challenging this rule in the Fifth Circuit. And we are through that process. I am not a lawyer, but I understand the process in terms of we've done the written brief back and forth, amicus briefs. These are friend of the courts briefs. We've hired the best in terms of outside counsel. We've been coordinated all the way along. In the beginning of October, we moved to oral argument. And then about 4 months after the oral arguments are done, we can anticipate a decision. We are hopeful, we are optimistic, but hoping for something is not a plan. We still need dealers to start to pay attention to this, get on a path toward compliance. And we'll put a guide out here in the coming weeks. Although it's been very difficult for us to put a guide out because the rule itself is very, very hard, even for our experts to fully understand. It doesn't make a lot of sense. As I mentioned before, we're looking for common sense in Washington, D.C. The FTC has put no common sense into this rule. They said they introduced the rule based on complaints that were a fraction of the percentage of the overall business, and then the data that they used, they literally just made up. I mean, how could more paperwork save consumers time and money in the vehicle sales transaction process? And we've done studies with the Center for Automotive Research, independent studies that have shown that if this rule goes into place as written, that was better than what it first proposed, but it's still a disaster for consumers. It's going to lengthen our transaction time on average by an hour to an hour and 20 minutes. And that's exactly the opposite of what consumers are asking for. And, as dealers, we're getting a lot better at speeding things
Sure.
And making things happen much more quickly. So very frustrating process, but we're in it to win it. And we've got the best working with us to hopefully get get a decision that's not only going to be good for the industry, but good for consumers.
Any other things coming up on the political or legal front that you guys are watching very closely right now that maybe haven't hit or are just now hitting?
There are other things that of course we're always focused on. I mean, you got data privacy. This non-compete rule was something that we were certainly engaged on. Catalytic converter theft, right to the so-called right to repair. I mean, there's a laundry list of things, and I could lull your listeners to sleep with all that. But our main focus, really, in the regulatory and the legislative arena, is this vehicle shopping rule. Right. and electric vehicles. And I failed to mention, we are very active on the Hill as well, telling our story to members of Congress and encouraging members of Congress to defund or to approve appropriations riders, which would effectively not give the EPA or the FTC the ability to push through on these crazy programs. And we're looking at congressional review acts as well when it comes to the EPA. And this would make a lot more sense for our country if we had one national standard. To have three different sets of rules has really it's been confusing, challenging for our manufacturers. And what happens is in times like these with the push to EVs, it doesn't make any sense to consumers, and the dealers are caught kind of in the middle. What do you mean I have to go across state borders to buy this type of vehicle because your allocation is such that I can't buy what I want at your dealer? The dealer ends up looking, it kind of reinforces some old stereotypes out there. We're telling the truth, but the truth doesn't make any sense, so it appears that we're lying. Right.
We just went through the whole CDK cyber attack. I know NADA has long pushed for dealers to be upfront or on top of their cyber defense activities. I think you guys have published at least a couple papers that I know of over the last few years. I think in the last 10 years, it's really become a problem. One, it's not reported often because I think some of us don't want to broadcast, or give the idea that it is an industry that is exposed. But the fact is, dealers are getting hacked all the time. We just saw what the CDK attacked. What were some of the steps that NADA, that you took immediately, and then secondly, some things that you think as an industry we need to do moving forward?
Well, I'll start with that because it's really important. I mean, you think about these types of attacks, and the NADA can put out guidance, so the safeguards rule, and best practices and all those things. But dealers are so busy, as we all know. And some of them, not all of them, some of them have pretty short attention spans, and maybe that's what makes them good at one of the reasons they're good at what they do. They have to deal with so many things. But to read a booklet from NADA about compliance is probably not on the top of most dealers' lists until it happens to them, right?
Sure.
So this whole incident with CDK, it's a wake-up call for dealers to, again, tighten up their policies. I don't think there's any guarantee, but you can certainly raise your level of security, insurance, protection against this happening to a dealership, because it's happened to many dealerships over the years. I know you've written about it.
Yes, yeah. Obviously, there's regulations in place that require notifying the customer, notifying the FTC when an attack has happened. You guys jumped in and helped, I think, protect the dealer's legal exposure.
Yes, we did. I mean, our legal team here, we've got an incredible team.
Right.
The key is, though, we didn't jump in. If we had jumped in the way some had wanted us to, I was shocked at how much juice they actually think the NADA has. You guys got to fix this thing. It's like, you want NADA to fix an issue with CDK, and why aren't you out in the media? What are you guys doing? Well, as so often, we were working behind the scenes. You remember, on the one hand, we are in a legal challenge with the FTC, but you got to
Yes.
compartmentalize things, right? You've got to be able to talk
Right.
to the people that sometimes you're at odds with in our business. That'll include the manufacturers, right? But we were in discussions with the FTC and CDK, pulling that together to protect the dealer and make sure there was an efficient way that if there was a breach, we still don't know if there's a breach.
Right.
But
True.
if a dealer experienced a breach, they are required to notify the FTC of that breach, which would have been a mess for our dealers. It would have been a mess for the FTC and probably CDK. So what the NADA did is we brought CDK, the FTC together based on our relationships, and the CDK will file, again, if there was a breach, they will file that notice requirement of notice on behalf of all the dealers, which is huge.
Right.
Now, there is still state requirements out there, and I don't have any news to report just yet on that, but we are in active discussions to see if we can do the exact same thing for the states. We're working with my counterparts in the ATAE world,
Right.
Their leadership, and we hopefully will have some good news to report then. I mean, the best news will be that there was no breach at all.
Yes.
But we want to make sure that we're prepared. And now we're obviously pivoting to what happens next. I mean, there was an interruption in service. There's insurance claims. There are employees I read that are suing CDK. There are dealers. Right. We've heard some incredible stories about the resiliency of dealers and how they were able to get through this. But no doubt, and it's publicly reported by the public groups, business was certainly hurt by this incident. So we will be engaged as always. We may not, likely will not be out front shouting at CDK and the media, but we'll be working behind the scenes for our dealer members. That's our charter.
Right. And I know you guys don't talk often about some of the victories or the battles that you fight because, as you said, you have to continue talking and having good relationships with some of those people that are on the other side of the table from you.
We are in the relationship business, and if we're going to spike the football every time we get to the end zone, my guess is they're not going to, not my guess, I know we're not going to be invited to play in the next game. We've got to keep the doors open to make sure the dealer voice is heard. And we communicate that in a constructive way, but also in a forceful way, because that's our job. We've got to tell the government, tell the OEMs exactly what their dealers are thinking.
Now, you guys recently did a webinar and did have some sort of a partnership now with Authenticom Dealer Vault. What is that relationship exactly?
We have long believed that dealers need to do a better job of tracking where their information is going. Way back when the information was kind of, vendors would go in and they would at times scoop more than they should. Sometimes probably just out of laziness. I'm going to give them the benefit of the doubt, right? Out of laziness. But dealers, on average, I think they have 15, 17 relationships with vendors, and they need to make sure they know exactly which vendors are getting which pieces of data, and they need to know that it's a set it and forget it situation, right?
Sure.
I pick, a vAuto or a Carfax. They need different information, but different information should go to each vendor, just what they need, and it should go to the vendor in a method that is not only transparent, but it's efficient. The dealers shouldn't have to pay to have access to their own information to use the services that their vendors are providing. So what we did is we've put together a relationship with Authenticom, and at no cost, the dealers can sign up. And the whole idea is the dealers then will know exactly which data is going to which vendor, and then the vendor will have an opportunity to pay Authenticom, I'll just say, a heck of a lot less than they would with some that are out there charging integration fees. So we think that this is not only good for dealers, it's good for the vendor community. It's also good for our industry. If you think about it, Tesla's got a one-to-one relationship with their customer. We need to have the exact same, but we need to work with the vending community. We need to work with our OEMs. And there's a lot of things that go on behind the scenes, and that needs to happen in an efficient, transparent manner so we can take costs out of our business, because really the customer cares about a great product and a great experience. They don't need to worry about all the stuff that we've got going on behind the scene, but we can do a better job of what's going on behind the scene. And that's why we entered in this relationship with Authenticom.
Let's go to the manufacturer for a little bit and just talk about, I think in recent years, especially following the during the pandemic and right after, much of the conversation was focused on an agency type model or direct to consumer model. And we were hearing conversation from some of the manufacturers. It seems like we're getting back to pre-pandemic year, both certainly on the inventory and even profitability and sales. But is it time we can put those conversations to bed, or do we still have to be vigilant? I guess, speaking from a dealer's perspective, watching the manufacturers closely before they stray too far beyond the guardrails.
I'm not that smart, but I predicted this, right? I've been around a long time. As soon as the inventory came back, we know all this talk of agency and D2C would subside.
Right.
We're almost at 3 million units again.
Right. Yeah.
The incentives are back. Look, dealers are not a cost. They are a value in terms of distribution. As we know, we have, for a brief time there, we were in a place where cars were easy to sell and demand outpaced supply. We're back to where we've always been. We're in a push market. And when that happens, every deal is unique. Dealers are market makers. They're displaying the product. They've got the customer has the ability to drive it. And then every deal structure is unique. Customers have trades more often than not. They need financing, and dealers bring value to that whole transaction. So the whole idea that dealers are a cost is just an outdated way of thinking. We are a value to the manufacturers, and most of them have recognized this, and they've done it in a very public way. And we're going to release a study here in the coming weeks. We're having some conversations with a few of the manufacturers right now to show a database representation of what I just said, that dealers are a value, not a cost to the system. But I think gone are the days, the talk of agency. I mean, it's happening in Europe, but it's happening in Europe for a very different reason. Very different reason than dealers were making things look easy during the pandemic in terms of selling cars. And, the manufacturers, they've tried this before.
Right.
But some of them have already forgotten about it, right? Because people cycle through and there's new ideas.
Right.
So I like to think that it's all put to bed. It's not all put to bed, but I'm happy to report that our legacy OEMs, the vast majority of them, are saying that their dealers are a competitive advantage, and they're working with their dealers. Let's stop talking about dealers as a cost, because it's just not true. Let's focus on what needs to be focused on: great product and great customer experience. How do we work better together to make that happen? That's where the conversation should have been all along.
Sure.
The rest of it was just noise. That's why the NADA came out with our guiding principles a few years back. All that being said, we've still got some problem kids out there. I've yet to get a confirmation from Scott Keogh that Scout is going to use the franchise model, and Scout and his team, the overall structure at VW AG, they're going to have a fight on their hands should they decide to go around the franchise system. We cannot have a manufacturer competing directly with its partner dealers. That just doesn't make sense. And they'll have a full fight on their hands should that happen. The same holds true for Honda, Sony, and the Afeela brand. I was just going to ask
about Sony and Honda. Yes.
Yeah, and we have yet to get a commitment from their leadership as well. And I want you to know, Cliff, and your listeners to know, that the NADA has been all over this for the past couple of years, including a trip to Tokyo to talk to Mr. Mibe directly about it. Scott Keogh's office is just over my left shoulder here. I'm literally haunting him. I've had one face-to-face meeting with him. I just sent another email asking for a follow-up to talk about that study I referenced. and to also talk about the ad that the ATAE group had placed about a month or so ago in the automotive news.
Right.
So yeah, there are still some issues out there and some concerns. And again, that's I call that job security. That's what we're here for. We're here to make sure the dealers' interests are represented. And we can't force them, but we will, at least not yet, because they haven't made a decision. But should they make a decision, I'm 100% sure we will have a legal challenge on our hands.
Well, I imagine the folks at Scout are, and you don't need to even comment on this, but from my perspective, certainly the recent news with the relationship with Rivian, potential relationship with Rivian, has got to have them quite nervous about their long-term prospects. Yeah. I would think.
I won't comment on that.
No.
I will say what I think we both know. You just look at Rivian. It is so difficult.
Yes.
It's so expensive to bring a product to market. Why on earth would you want to invest in selling and servicing that as well? The dealer will be able to do it better than the manufacturer.
Right.
100 out of 100 times, and they're going to be able to do it for less money for the manufacturer.
Yeah, and I suspect that the Honda-Sony relationship, I'm just predicting here that won't get too far, just based on previous history, recent history, with some of these types of initiatives.
I would agree. If there was a concern meter and it went 1 to 5, Honda-Sony would probably be somewhere between 1 and 2.
Right.
But VW Scout's probably more like a 4.
Really? Okay. All right.
The world has changed since they bought that factory down in South Carolina and they launched that brand. EV demand has softened,
right?
And selling cars has certainly not. It's gotten a lot more difficult,
right? And listen, I think a Scout vehicle would be awesome to see on our roads. I think I would love to see that. But like you said, I think probably the only way to gain traction on that is to make it part of the dealer's portfolio, as opposed to trying to do that on their own. So
for sure,
interesting. All right, real quick, China.
Yes.
Just, there's this long shadow. We just don't know where or what it's going to look like in coming years. Obviously, the election may play a role in that. Where, to use your analogy, where is it on the concern meter for NADA?
For now, it's more on the get smart.
Okay.
Area. We have talked to some experts. We have a board of 65. We've had kind of just brainstorming type discussions. Is this going to be a good thing for dealers? Is it going to be a bad thing for dealers? What about our current OEMs? What about our country?
Yeah.
We talked about all of those things. And we're not ready to take a position on this just yet. We need to, we're a very deliberate organization. Once we make up our mind, we tend to we stick with it, but we want to make sure that we don't move too soon. On the one hand, I was in Australia last year. You've got dealers that were unhappy with Mercedes-Benz, dealers that were unhappy with Honda, and they were very happy to take on the Chinese brands.
Sure.
To fill the gap. And dealers, as we've always said, some crazy people out there would say dealers don't want to sell EVs. Dealers will sell anything a customer wants. Yeah, as we know. And the customer wants a Chinese vehicle. Well, the dealer's probably going to want to sell them. That being said, there's the whole concept of dumping and unfair or unlevel playing field. Right. All of those things are going to factor in, and we of course will talk to our manufacturers about this. At the end of the day, we'll do what we think, what the dealers want us to do, and what's best for dealers. But it's just too soon for us to take a position on this. I do think no matter which administration, it's going to be a while before those vehicles get here. Those tariffs are I think that's going to be what we're going to see in the short run anyway. Yeah, it certainly appears that at least on the Republicans and Democrats are in lockstep regarding their understanding of what they perceive the threat to be from a national security perspective, not just a financial perspective. There is some
possibility. I mean, Trump seems to be opening the door, at least he has a couple times, to the idea of the Chinese building factories here and putting American people to work, just like the Japanese or Germans do. But like you said, it's going to be a while. It will certainly be a while before we see that play out.
That's the thought. But gosh, in this industry, and you never know.
Yeah, that's true. All right. So next 5 years, let's make some assumptions here. China's not here. EV question. I mean, EVs are pretty much what we're seeing today. Maybe, more, maybe 10, 15% of sales, maybe even 20% of sales. But do you see a changed or radically changed industry, or do you see much of what we're seeing, similar to what we're doing today?
I think it's going to be very, very close. We just got to keep getting better at exactly what we're doing today.
Right.
The franchise model, look, I'm a salesman for the franchise model, but it is the most efficient. It's the most efficient, cost-effective model. But we need to work with our OEMs. We need to work with the vendors to continue to improve that customer experience. We've got to be, just like any business, we've got to get better. But Cliff, I just don't see it being different 5, 10, 15, 20 years from now.
Right.
This is a proven model that's worked.
Right.
And there have been many predictions of our demise over the years.
There still are. I mean, it's...
Well, there's this saying, if it's easy, anybody can do it. And the mistake that's made so often is people think it's easy.
Right.
There's nothing easy about being a car dealer.
Right. And the only one that has had any success going direct to consumer is Tesla. And I think that the final chapter has yet to be written. I think that is still an evolving story that
it is. And to use Jeff Bohanka, I like his saying, Tesla made it into orbit.
Right.
And they got into orbit for a bunch of different reasons that I don't want to talk about right now.
Sure.
But it's going to be difficult for other new manufacturers to break through.
Right.
It is as I mentioned before, it is very expensive to get into the manufacturing business when it comes to vehicles.
Yes. Yeah. Well, Michael, this has been fascinating and very concise, clear description of of what we're going to be seeing over the next several months. And I really appreciate your time today.
Yeah. Thanks for having me, Cliff.
Thanks. Thank you, Michael.
The 2024 AUTOVATE conference is right around the corner. Come to Scottsdale, Arizona, December 4th and 5th for the unique connections and opportunities you can only find at AUTOVATE. Space is limited and registrations are filling up. So don't wait. Register at autovate.org today to secure your spot at the industry event for automotive innovation, networking, and deal making.